Hey, this is Mark, and this is episode 17 of the Why Are We Still Doing This podcast. So, why are we still counting down the days? Before I hit age 40, I felt like I had a countdown for everything. A countdown until the last day of school before summer vacation, a countdown for the next Walt Disney World trip, even at one point a countdown for my next therapy session. Shortly after I hit 40 years old, I remember filling out a form online that hit me really hard. It was something totally benign, too, and not some scary medical form for an appointment. I think it had something to do with my Six Flags season pass. And on part of the form, you had to enter your birth year, which would then populate your age in the box next to it. I scrolled all the way down to 1981, like I was spinning the big wheel on The Price is Right. And in the adjacent box, the number 40 popped up. 40. And I sat there and I looked at it for a second, and that was the moment it hit me. Wow. I thought, for years I was always counting up, counting the days to be a teenager, counting the days to be 18, counting the days to be 21. When that number 40 popped up on that form, I thought, I wish time would slow down a little. And that was the day I realized I didn't want to do countdowns anymore. It seems as though, and this is the consensus, that time goes by faster as you get older. But why? Is it because you're in your late 30s, early 40s, and you're just so busy with kids, soccer games, and PTG meetings? Or is it because you're retired and bored and go to Walmart multiple times a day because I need a couple of new forks, even though the forks I have are 40 years old and work perfectly fine and I have no other hobbies? Or is it because you're having fun? Time flies when you're having fun, supposedly. When you were a child, the summers did indeed feel endless. Riding bikes further than your parents ever thought you'd go, wandering around abandoned factories, video games until 6 a.m., and sometimes not showering for days because those days in the pool or the river near the house sort of counted as bathing. I remember at some of our sleepovers, we literally never went to bed. We would stay up literally through the next day, our bodies running on copious amounts of Crystal Pepsi and Mountain Dew until our bodies were screaming at us to get some sleep. And we'd pass out around 3 in the afternoon and not wake up until 10 a.m. the next day. I don't remember being a kid and checking the calendar constantly to see how many days of summer vacation we had left. I do remember counting the days of school we had left before summer vacation, though. I think our parents just told us sometime in late August, got to go back to school next week. And we'd be like, oh, man. But we didn't have much to think about then. And there are two reasons why I think life goes by so much quicker when you're older. One, you're so busy, especially with those children, that you don't have time to slow down to the point that you lose track of what day it is. Sometimes adults forget what day it is due to the fact they've been going nonstop. The second reason why life seems to go by so much faster as an adult is because you always have dates in your head. You've got doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, both for you and your kids, soccer practice, parent-teacher conferences, birthdays, play dates, hair appointments, oil changes, veterinary appointments, all the things that you write down on your calendar in your kitchen. You schedule dental cleanings for every 6 months. So if you have an appointment in mid-September, you're scheduling for March of next year. And the person scheduling the appointment will always say something like, I can't believe it's springtime at your next appointment. People say stuff at the end of January like, I can't believe we're already most of the way through January. And then midway through July, people will say, I can't believe we're already halfway through 2025, or whatever year it is. We're always looking ahead, which I guess is a good thing, but it doesn't help to slow down time at all. People in the Northeast are always trying to get to springtime. They're always looking to get out of winter as soon as they can. Unless they're absolutely psycho and say stuff like, the colder the better. It's no wonder why the Northeast has so many people with depression, because they all are in love with fall, the season where everything is dying. People in the Northeast love fall. And when I say fall, I mean mid-September through Halloween. Literally the day after Halloween, there isn't anything else to look forward to other than spring. Except Christmas, of course. And maybe Thanksgiving. This is the time of year that everyone hates the weatherman in the Northeast. News anchors bring the weatherman in for his segment in the middle of February, and they'll say, well, Bob, are we ever going to see the fucking sun again? After 17 days of feeling like you're living in a Tim Burton film. Once spring comes, the weatherman is like the king of the news team. They say, well, Bob is here once again, bringing the sunshine and giving us all a break from those antidepressants we've been on since November. People in the Northeast do love winter, though. Skiing, snowboarding, plowing. Winter in the Northeast is like that toxic relationship you kept going back to in your early 20s. The first time they show up after not seeing them in a while is very attractive to you. You say, oh, look at how pretty the snow looks on the trees. Then sometime in March, you realize how badly they've screwed you. Again. And you just want them gone. And you're like, take your shovels, your gloves, and warm hats, and get out of my house. Then sometime around late September, you think, building a snowman is fun. I think I'd like to do that again soon. And the cycle continues. Getting back to time slowing down, you constantly have numbers in your head as an adult, as opposed to when you were a kid and it was this infinite stretch of your life. Remember being 17 and thinking, man, I can't wait to turn 18 and finally be an adult and do all the things an 18-year-old can do. After that, it was, man, I can't wait to be 21 and do all the things a 21-year-old can do. At 24, it was, man, I can't wait to rent a car without that stupid added fee. Now at 44, it's, man, I wish I could do all the things someone under 18 could do. I have a little bit of PTSD from a Disney World countdown that my family had. 4 years ago, we were set to go to Disney World in July of 2021, triumphantly returning home after a long year of dealing with COVID-19, masks, social distancing, and not being able to hug family and friends. A friend of ours gave us a set of blocks used to create a Disney countdown where you could rearrange the letters on the blocks to say so many days until Disney. And the kids were so excited to change it every day. With every shift in the numbers meant a day closer to riding the Haunted Mansion, eating Mickey waffles, which in the grand scheme of things were mass-produced Eggo waffles in the shape of Mickey Mouse, and getting hit in the back of the ankle with strollers every 8 seconds. Then in June of that year, we saw somewhat of a resurgence of COVID that quickly spread like wildfire by the end of July. And toward the end of June, my father-in-law, who was 76 years old, had COPD and was generally not in good shape, caught COVID. He ended up going into the hospital a couple of days after feeling sick, as it had moved into his lungs and developed into COVID pneumonia, and never left. He passed away on July 17th. We were scheduled to leave for Disney World a week from that date, and unfortunately canceled due to everything that happened. My brother-in-law and his family had to fly up from Florida, where they live, and by the time services were in order, there was no way we could have done our Disney trip. So we had to squash the countdown and reschedule the trip, which ended up being a good thing because at that time, a lot of places were bringing back mask mandates due to rapidly rising COVID numbers. And ever since then, I've been hesitant to do any type of countdown. I even have this phobia of writing exciting things down on the calendar sometimes because I feel like it's going to be canceled for some reason. It's almost like I'm jinxing myself. Someone's going to get sick. But then again, it wouldn't be vacation without someone getting sick. Just this past August, we ended up at urgent care in Sanibel, Florida, for a bacterial rash that my daughter had. And might I add, this was the smoothest urgent care appointment I've ever had for someone or for one of my kids. We were in and out the door in 24 minutes. I booked online the day before, got there right at 8 a.m. There was no one else there. The doctor took one look at my daughter's rash and said, "Yep, that's impetigo," and was at Walgreens to get the prescription shortly after. That's something I would say to research as someone who has wicked anxiety and catastrophic thinking around medical issues. Before you leave for vacation, see if there's an urgent care near your accommodations. I want to talk a little bit about parenting and how people my age are incredibly stressed having to parent both up and down. I don't know if that's a specific term, but I'm just rolling with it now. And what I mean by parenting up and down is that parents like me in their late 30s or mid 40s are parenting their children anywhere from 0 to 17 years of age and dealing with all of the challenges that come along with it. At the same time, a lot of people, friends of mine included, are realizing who they are, what they were, and realizing a whole lot of shit about their childhood. I talked about this in my podcast with my friend Ron Worth, episode 12, where I mentioned that my generation is really letting go of social norms and engaging in more talk therapy, becoming who they want to finally be in life, and really learning a lot about themselves, and at the same time doing a shitload of work on themselves in talk therapy. And what they're learning about themselves is that some of the things that went on in their childhood were not okay, somewhat dysfunctional, and maybe a little traumatic. And while they're working on themselves in therapy, they are parenting their children, and sometimes parenting their parents at the same time. And that's what I mean by parenting up and down. I have a number of friends who say they are constantly stressed by their parents in the way they try to intervene in their life, especially with their children. They are constantly having to talk with their parents about interactions with their grandchildren for whatever reason, but mostly because they feel their interactions with them are not healthy and the grandparents feel it's an attack on them. On top of that, their parents are still writing checks, falling for every scam known to man, unable to navigate modern technology, and unfortunately, in a lot of situations, being generally selfish. People my age are parenting their children and parenting their parents, and it's exhausting. The once or twice a year trip adults and their children make back home to see their parents and grandparents becomes a stressful, tense, week-long or 2-week-long stay. Think of it this way. You move out at 18. You go to college. You come home and visit for a few days at a time, and it's fine. Then you get your own place, and your visits home become less frequent. You then get to a point where you travel back to your parents' house with your entire family, and you spend, let's say, over a week with them. And that's hard for a lot of people who grew up in a dysfunctional household to come back to that for a short-term stay, now as an adult, realizing more about themselves and realizing they don't want to grow up like their parents. For a lot of people my age, they are parenting the exact opposite of the way they were brought up. And it's exhausting. It's difficult because they've worked really hard on themselves, going through therapy and realizing that the environment they grew up in as a kid was not okay. A lot of times they were not heard, they weren't praised, there was nobody there for them. A friend of mine texted me recently after I posted a video on my TikTok page, Why Are We Still Doing This?, which you can find on TikTok, talking about how millennials are going to therapy to learn how to manage their parents' needs. And she said to me, one of my main parenting goals is to not send my daughter to therapy for the same reasons my mom landed me in counseling. And that is another added level of stress, and that is not f***ing this up. The stress of, what if my kid turns out with the same insecurities, anxiety, and depression as I did? Well, the fact that you acknowledge and are concerned about this happening is a major step in the right direction of them not inheriting those things. While some of that is biological, yes, and we can't control that, but there's a lot we can control. The other hard thing about living far away from home and visiting once or twice a year is the fact that people my age have parents who are in their late 70s. And to put it into perspective, if you see them for a week once a year and your parents are in their mid-70s, let's say they have only another 5 years. That means you're only going to see your parents 5 more times in your life. And that's really a difficult thing to comprehend. Why are we still thinking children cannot hear adult conversations? Some adults are completely clueless about, 1, how their adult conversations affect young children, and 2, they're completely unaware, to begin with, about the fact they're even in earshot of their children. When I was a kid, I spent many nights falling asleep listening to my mom and dad argue with each other. I was upstairs in my bedroom. They were normally downstairs in the kitchen, and I would almost always keep my bedroom door open a little bit as a kid, and I'd use the small table lamp right outside my room as a nightlight. And my mom later said, years later, she figured that I could hear them arguing. I don't know if they both realized they were loud, but were caught up in the moment, or if one of them was trying to say, hey, the kids are probably going to hear this. But regardless of the reason, I heard it. And I've really tried to think about what I was thinking in those moments, I don't necessarily remember being scared. I feel like I may have pulled the covers over my head to avoid having to listen to it. And most of the time, I really couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could tell they weren't arguing about what they should be watching on HBO after the kids went to bed. Thinking about it now, I would love to know the context of the argument. And I made it a point to never have my kids go through that same thing. Now, that is easier said than done, as there are many factors involved. If I hadn't met my wife and eventually gone to therapy to work on myself and was still stuck in the previous relationship that was incredibly unhealthy years ago, I would have been a terrible father if that person and I had children. I'm talking about the relationship before I met my wife. I didn't know myself. I didn't know why I did the things I did. I do know that if that person and I ended up getting married, it would have been because I manifested this fantasy world where everything was okay and that I was, quote, in love with her, when in reality, I barely even liked her, and marrying this person was the right thing to do because we had been together for so long. And we would have had children, which would have made many chinks in the armor of that fantasy world I created until that armor was shattered. When things were awful, I remember for a hot second and a half, what if we had a baby? I think that would make things better. Thought that for a hot second. Good God. Thankfully, that thought faded as quickly as a test fart in an airplane. We would have been yelling at each other in front of the kids, not realizing I was putting them in the same environment I was in as a kid, and we would have ended up getting an incredibly messy divorce, I'm sure. My kids would have hated me, and I wouldn't have realized what the hell just happened until years later. Even before I got to the point of realizing what happened, I would have been that parent that put their child in the middle of everything. Because if you didn't know, the easiest way to hurt the other parent is to go through the child. Saying things like, your mother won't let me see you, or your father doesn't feed you a decent meal at his house. Luckily, my sister and I could kind of laugh about some of the things that our parents said as we got older. However, it's still stuff I would not say to my children. In my retro video game series, I talked about how my mother would always say to my sister and I don't think you guys are getting much for Christmas this year. As if to say, Mom doesn't have much money. This was when my parents were separated. And my dad would say something to us like, your mother has got you kids so fooled. She's got so much money. And I imagine my mother literally swimming in a sea of gold coins, like Scrooge McDuck during the opening to DuckTales. But I've seen that in so many relationships, heard it from so many kids in the schools I've worked in, and it's so easy to do. Just to unload your anger and frustration out on your ex-spouse or ex-partner indirectly onto your child. Some parents just don't get it. Don't argue with each other in front of your kids. Now, a healthy disagreement is fine to have, and I think it can be beneficial to have in front of the kids because it models appropriate methods of communication and how disagreements should be handled. But shouting matches, blaming, objects being thrown are unhealthy to begin with, so don't let another generation have to inherit that inability to manage conflicts in a healthy way. 13 years ago, my wife and I were renting an apartment in a great house with great neighbors and even had a great little backyard with a garden and a fire pit. We had been there for 4 years at this point. There was an apartment below us that was a small one-bedroom that had had a couple different tenants over the years that we were there, and they were all great people. The neighbor in that apartment when we moved in was a single guy named Marty, who was a custodian at a local high school, but was also quite the drinker. Nice guy, though. I think he was eventually evicted, though, because he drunkenly drove his car into the small shed across from the house, enough to move the shed off its foundation and turn it somewhat sideways. My wife actually saw the whole thing happen and watched him stumble out of his car and try to literally push the shed back into place with his Busch Light-fueled muscles. That apartment underneath us also bordered the largest apartment in the house that was occupied by the sweetest old lady you'd ever met in your life. Anyway, a young girl, probably a couple of years younger than us, had moved in sometime in December, the last year that we were in the apartment. She was quiet, sweet, but we didn't meet her until a couple weeks after she moved in. A few times in the first couple weeks of her tenure, she had a male visitor over, and their activities could be very much heard through the floor. Her bedroom was right below our living room. We later learned that this male visitor was not her boyfriend. Her boyfriend at the time was somewhere down south temporarily and soon to be returning. And when he returned, he found out. Oh, he found out all right. Every single night he came over, they argued. They argued until all hours of the night. And it was always the same argument. Him getting pissed, she was cheating on him. And it was those really immature arguments we all have in our early to mid-20s. I remember going out into the hallway on the second floor where our washer and dryer were. There was a staircase that led down to the back door of their apartment. And if you were loading laundry and they were in their kitchen, you could hear them clear as day. Other than that, you could hear them throwing things, screaming at each other, just utter chaos. It was like someone left a DVD of the best of Jerry Springer on loop at full volume. And I felt so badly for our elderly neighbor who had to deal with it all the time, hearing the sound of what was I believe, a dresser being tossed around like a football. Our elderly downstairs neighbor had called the police early on, but it continued for days. I finally met this girl one day when we were going out to our cars, and being the polite neighbor I was, I offered to invite her over that evening. So that evening, she and her boyfriend showed up to our apartment. She made some brownies. We had a couple drinks, had a nice time. Then they went back downstairs. Nice people, but it was one of those things where it was like, do you guys know how loud you really are? After they left, we noticed they left the ceramic plate that the brownies were on, that she had made for us. The funny thing was that it almost was an identical match to the plate set that we had in our house. And I said, we'll get it to her later, I said to my wife. Long story short, the fights continued. The screaming continued. Waking up in the middle of the night to that sound of muffled arguing under the floorboards and chairs being knocked over continued. I'd fall asleep to her hysterically crying because he threatened to leave her. Thinking about it now, I'm like, then just go, dude. You've got the upper hand here. You don't have kids. My wife and I would run our air purifier at night, not just necessarily to purify the air, but to block out all the bullshit. Just walking from their kitchen to their bedroom sounded like Clydesdales clomping their way to deliver cases of Budweiser. Anytime I pulled into the driveway and saw his car, I knew they were going to end up fighting, and I'd have to fall asleep or be awoken to insanity. Our landlord already had a problem with the amount of time her boyfriend was there, as he was not a listed tenant on the rental agreement. Then on top of that, anytime he was over, the shit hit the fan, and we would let our landlord know about it. After the numerous noise complaints from us, as well as our 80-year-old downstairs neighbor, our landlord gave her one last strike before an eviction notice. Then, one morning, I was getting ready to leave for work. My wife had already left for the day, and both of them were already going at it, and not in a good way. It wasn't even 8 in the morning, and the Jerry Springer DVD started playing. Just as the argument rose to a dramatic climax, like something straight out of an after-school special, the thunderous sound of glass shattering could be heard, so loud you would have thought Stone Cold Steve Austin was making an appearance. Her boyfriend threw a chair, a wooden chair, through a brand new energy-efficient window in the kitchen, a window our landlord had just replaced not even a couple months ago. I don't remember if I told our landlord about this incident or my downstairs neighbor did, but by the time the girl downstairs returned home that evening, there was a crisp eviction notice taped to her front door. Our landlord later told us they tried to say it was an accident and that they, quote, accidentally broke the window with a broomstick while cleaning. Yeah, sure. I remember hearing our neighbor come home and heard her crying on the phone to her boyfriend about being evicted. I don't remember how long she had to move out, but we never saw her again. For a number of years following all of this, we realized we still had the ceramic plate she brought brownies over on when she moved in. My wife and I would joke and say, maybe we can mail it to her. From what I knew from other people, they stayed together and eventually moved to Florida. Never really thought about them again after that. 13 years later, I had one of my lone stand-up comedy gigs that summer in the next town over from me. I don't do stand-up comedy as much as I used to. I had been out of stand-up for a few years, and it was so awesome to have so many friends come out to see me that particular night. Family, coworkers, even my boss. It's a smaller space, and the crowd is right up on me, and I can see everyone. And as I look out at the crowd before I'm about to go on, I see a lot of familiar faces. Some coworkers, my wife, and even my daughter got to see me do stand-up. That I was very happy about, because it's not often that I get the chance to perform live anymore. And as I'm scanning the crowd, I stop dead in my tracks, because who do I see? But that girl and her boyfriend who had a month-long reign of terror in that apartment 13 years ago. Of all the people I expected to see at a show, these two were definitely at the bottom of the list. And somehow it didn't distract me from my show, but I always wondered if they remembered who I was and whispered to each other during my set, "I think he's the one who still has our plate." I think this couple has children, and I truly hope that they've been able to manage to get to a place where if they argue, it's not in front of the kids, because knowing what it's like to grow up with parents who argued a lot, I wouldn't want that for any kid. So, anyway, thank you for listening. This has been episode 17 of Why Are We Still Doing This? And if you'd like to write in, you can do so at whyarewestilldoingthispodcast@gmail.com. Why are we still doing this podcast at gmail.com? And I will see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you then. Bye.